Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, joined tonight by my co-host, Matt Filippo. Matt, what's going on?
Bill, have you seen the renderings that Penn State put out for the new boxes you can get at Beaver Stadium? I have one question right off the bat about those.
You say you can get, I'm not going to be getting one of those.
Well, right. But this kind of leads to my point, Bill. In the renderings, there are framed photographs on all of the walls, obviously. If you purchase a box and your season tickets are in boxes, do you get to pick what play is framed? Is my big question. And I've been thinking about what I would pick. And I settled on when Shaka Toney did finger guns at Shea Patterson after Tariq Castro Fields interception. I think that would be my first choice. I've been thinking about that since I saw those a couple hours ago.
That would be a very good choice. I don't even let myself think about those boxes because I will never, ever sit in one. But we are joined tonight on the pod, Matt and I, by someone who's going to be sitting in a box in Beaver Stadium. Maybe not the fancy donor boxes, but instead the press box, our buddy Daniel Gallen from Lions247. Daniel, what's going on, brother?
Hey, Bill. Hey, Matt. Speaking of being pictured in boxes, in the University of Maryland, Maryland Stadium press box, as of November 2023, there is a picture of the student section from a 2012 game against NC State where Perry Hills blew out his knee that I am in.
Oh, no!
And the reason that you can find me is because there was homecoming, so that everyone wore red. Then they had seats with a white M. And the people I was meeting up with were in the white M, but I was getting there in the second quarter, and I was wearing a red shirt. So I am wearing a red shirt in the M with actually two other guys in red shirts in the middle of the white M. I hope that photo is still up. We will find out Thanksgiving weekend, but that's always a trip down memory lane for me.
Daniel, how does the Maryland press box compare to the old Penn State press box? I've told this story on the pod before, but in 2018, the Penn State Maryland game was, I think, also the weekend between Thanksgiving, either before or after. And a Maryland student, the pipes had frozen in the press box bathroom, and we had to go downstairs. And a Maryland student reporter turned to me and goes, "Is this place always this terrible?" And I laughed as hard as I think I've ever laughed. It was so funny.
Yeah, that Maryland press box, I think, opened in 2009, maybe. So it was pretty good. I spent a lot of time there doing work, and you're very high up though. And it was like a very it's a very looking down press box, which, you can go here and there, but I can't complain too much. I had some good times there.
Real video game angle that they're giving you. And when you check out the all 22 at what's the name of Maryland Stadium?
It's CQ Stadium right now.
What was it before? It was that
Bird Stadium.
There we go.
Actually, it is right there.
There we go.
First Big Ten game against Ohio State.
Named after famed Maryland alumnus Larry Bird.
Yes.
So we have Daniel on the podcast today because we're going to be playing a game a little bit later in the pod. Also, if you were watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this, thank you for listening wherever you're listening. If you are watching this on YouTube, this is a total coincidence that both Daniel and I are wearing Portland Trailblazers things. This was not something that we planned beforehand. And if you're listening to this and you don't know what we mean, go subscribe over on our YouTube channel so you can see exactly why Daniel and I went, "Oh, that's weird," right when we started the podcast. But we're going to get to the game in a second. But we wanted to get someone on the beat on at some point during this offseason because Daniel, when remind me when you started covering Penn State? It's been a few years, I know.
2021, so this is year 6,
yes.
And this is my 5th year with Lions247.
So I guess my question is that your entire time covering Penn State was one thing. It was James Franklin's program. It was the program built in James Franklin's image. And now you are in this different media environment with Matt Campbell where practice times are in the morning and you meet with players. There are a bunch of little differences that have been articulated by people on the beat all offseason. And I guess my big question is just how have things been different for you and for other folks on the beat in this first year under Matt Campbell and his Nittany Lion team compared to the first 6 years that you spent covering Penn State?
I think one thing that stands out to me is with any coach is sort of learning what the code is that they speak in. With James, I think it was like short-term injuries and long-term injuries. I remember when I covered the Eagles, like Doug Peterson had like day to day, week to week, month to month, and each thing meant something different. So I think with Matt Campbell, like that's like an example of, all right, when this guy talks and he says something, like what does it mean? What is he actually communicating? What is the subtext? I think that that's something that really stands out to me, and you learn what different crutches are. I think a lot of us who've listened to a lot of James Franklin podcast or press conferences, Jesus, when you say obviously, sometimes it sticks in your head like, did I used to say this a lot before 2021 when I moved up here? Or has that always been a vocal tick of mine? I think that things like that are in the very, very micro, like beat reporter specific things, the things that I think about while I'm, walking from the practice field to the car. I think that's something that really stands out to me. And then the other thing is just getting into the routine, the rhythm. Under Franklin, it was there was the switch when they moved the presser from Tuesday to Monday. But other than that, it was always like, okay, this is going to be Monday. This is what Wednesday is. This is what Thursday is. And wasn't a whole lot of deviation from that. With Campbell, we're still going to have a routine, but it's going to be different. And so, all right, how does that feel different? How does that reorient things on a week-to-week basis so that I can also have a life outside of doing this stuff every single day?
Daniel, I have one immediate question, just thinking through, because I know you guys have all had pretty much open practice availability. I think you had one today at time of recording, and that is your fourth in total. Is that correct?
Yes.
How hands-on is Matt Campbell on the practice field? Because I've heard some rumblings just from, reading your work, listening to the Lions247 podcast. When I covered the team as a student reporter, James Franklin was very much front and center. I feel like, especially when the media was let in. We used to go on Wednesday nights, which I know you guys still did under Franklin, when they had the music absolutely blaring. And I feel like you could hear Franklin over that a lot of the time. Matt Campbell feels like a much more reserved. He feels like a guy who's like truly from the Midwest, as opposed to Franklin, who I feel like was Philly suburbs through and through in a lot of different ways. What's the difference in how Matt Campbell leads a practice? And obviously, maybe there was 3 times in total Franklin opened up the entire practice, but what are the biggest differences you're noticing as someone who's able to be out there a little bit more frequently than you've been in the past?
Yeah, I think an example is today. Like, I don't really remember seeing him there. I was mostly watching the defense. But it happens, a lot of times where we'd be on the sideline and someone would say, like, where's Campbell? Where is he? Photographers be like, I got to get my Campbell shot. Like, where is he? Like, what is he doing? And with Franklin, you knew where he was on the field at all times. I do think there are some similarities where, Franklin would really float around. But that was mostly on offense. Every once in a while, he would go over to defense. But I think later on in his tenure, he really did adhere to the head coach of the defense philosophy for his defensive coordinator, but he would still come over and watch different drills, things like that. But you noticed him a lot more with the offense. I think with Campbell, a lot of it is you would just kind of look up and he would be there, and off to the side watching. I posted a video, but he would be hands-on. Like, I posted a video when we were in Huluba Hall last week where there was some handoff drill with quarterbacks and running backs, and he was playing the part of the pulling offensive lineman, getting out in front of the running backs, and it looked like he was having fun out there. Like, I think that he is someone that does enjoy the process of practicing. I think the most noticeable that he's been during practices is there's an emphasis on hustling off the field. during different drills. A lot of it is on like 7-on-7, some 11-on-11 stuff where it's like, you need to get off the field. These guys need to get on quickly. And that is, I think, when you really notice him, with the urging guys to get off the field quickly, to move quickly, to keep that tempo up. So I think that that's where he stood out the most to me in practice. But that aspect is definitely different. And in the spring, when we got our first look, I think that was something that people were kind of like, all right, like, where's he going to be? What's it going to sound like? Because the Franklin practices had a distinct sound. So this has been, I think, a cool learning thing for us.
Is it still loud? Like, how loud is music blaring? Because, like, I remember back in the day, it was crazy how much they cranked that up, or is it a little bit different?
It's a little bit different. I think even in the Franklin years, it was pulled back a little bit. I mean, when they were doing field goal stuff, end of game stuff, inside Haluba Hall, they would really crank it. But I think this fall in this preseason camp, like, there's definitely music going for most of it, but it wasn't super, super loud. Like, you could still have conversations. There are times when I'd be on the other side of the field and my Shazam couldn't quite pick up what the song was. So not super loud. I think it's very, very businessy.
Yeah, and we could spend an hour talking just about the music choices, as you and I do sometimes, Daniel, because every time a clip shows up of like them listening to the red jumpsuit apparatus at Penn State practice, I'm like, this can't be real.
That was nuts.
I still don't believe it, and I heard the clip of it, and I had you confirm it. But before we get into the game, I guess kind of the last question is here. You were around. You've been around a couple of Penn State teams. You were around last year's team, which, leave that in the past. What has kind of been the vibe around this year's team? Because I've been so fascinated in how every quote from from every Iowa State player, it's like, oh, wow, cool. We found a new happy family and we all love each other. And every Penn State player is just like, this is wild because I don't feel mortified of everything all the time. So, like, what have the vibes been like in watching them practice and being around the team and talking to players, talking to coaches, whatever that might be?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more low key. I think that the stress levels are down compared to where we were last year. That's something that I always go like back and forth on, where as a media member, the shirking of the 1-0 mindset last year and being like, we know, it was like a self-awareness that was being put out, like, hey, we know we're supposed to win the national championship, like, we know all this stuff. I loved it. But I think in terms of a way to run that team and probably from the fan perspective with how things ended, that probably wasn't the right way to go about things. But I think with this group of guys, like, there's an element of like, let's roll the ball out and see how it goes. I think that there's still a little bit of feeling each other out. I think there's a lot of confidence. It seems like the chemistry is coming together pretty well. There's a lot of this stuff though. And my big thing that with like the vibes and all this different stuff, the way that guys are acting, the way guys are talking, is I'm still like, all right, like, let's talk mid-October when you've got that USC Michigan back-to-back and how things go then. Like, what's it look like then? To me, that's really I hate to be one of those guys that's like, your true character shows under adversity. But I think that's where you learn the most about, these types of programs and, how things are going to go. But right now, like, everyone's loose. I think that the team really does seem close. I think when you talk about the guys that are returning, I think that there's a little bit of like, wait, there are different ways to do things. Like, you don't have to do things that one way. Like, I think that was a big thing in the spring and that carried over through the summer. And I think that there's a lot of guys that are just kind of ready to go and let it rip. I think that's a feeling that I get.
I appreciate how you made very clear there how Matt Campbell mindset is already starting to apply to you by going, it's going to get tough at some point, and we're going to have to lean on our character and our integrity and the things that make Penn State. Just like you mentioned, obviously, as Franklin's obvious vocal tick. It's the joke that we do all the time. But noticing it in Campbell, and his ticks are like, saying the word integrity, saying the word toughness. If Matt Campbell can get through a paragraph without saying the word toughness, it's like a miracle.
What was the big thing he kept on saying? Contact collision equity. I feel like he said that like 40.
Yeah.
I had never heard that term before, and I'm like, wow, he's really into making sure these guys are ready to take some hits.
Do you know why you've never heard that term before, Matt? Because that was
it's not a thing
in human history anyone ever said contact collision equity.
I felt like there was like supposed to be a hyphen somewhere when like I wrote it out, and I couldn't figure out where to put the hyphen.
You should have just like done it all different. Like, well, there are two different ways to do this. You should have done this each way and just oscillated back and forth and seen if anyone notices. But Daniel's here to play a game. Matt is here to play a game. I am here to play a game. And it's talking about this year's Penn State team in reference to last year's Penn State team, where we're just coming off of finishing up our series. We went through every single position group on Penn State's roster, which we also did last year in the lead up to last season. And it got us wondering, when we look at this year's Penn State team, which is just this weird hodgepodge of like three different football teams, well, Iowa State, Penn State, and there's just other guys that they have picked up, versus last year's Penn State team, which was James Franklin's team through and through, except for the wide receivers that Pat Kraft made him get. We wanted to compare one to the other and go position by position and wonder, which would you rather take? The 2025 version of this room on Penn State's roster, or the 2026 version of this room on Penn State's roster? We're going right down the list: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, cornerback, safety. And we're going to start with quarterback, which I think is a really tricky one. Daniel, I'm going to let you go first. 2025 versus 2026. Which one are you going to go with?
Man, I didn't want to go first. This was like the
okay,
one
Matt.
okay,
Okay,
I don't want to go first. But
Matt, you are going first. We are going to.
I'll take it.
Go ahead.
I mean, we're coming off of what was Drew on Thursday night or whatever in the preseason,
13
like
for 153.
We're coming off the best Drew hours look since the game against West Virginia 3 years ago, man. So it's like that's the last. It is crazy to think about. Like the last image we all have of Drew Aller playing, football in any organized way was him breaking his ankle against Northwestern, and then James Franklin getting fired the next day, and he looked like a different quarterback in that amount of time, which is might be fairly damning in one respect, but also a testament to Drew in another respect. Bill, I'm going to go with, and I want to make sure I'm viewing this through the college-only lens. I think Rocco Becht is going to end up being a better college quarterback than Drew Aller was. Pro, I think Aller's probably going to be a better pro. But I think where Rocco puts them to start, I think is an upgrade from what they had in 2025, especially considering how the healthy Drew Aller games went. Because yes, UCLA was a really good outing for him overall. He was gangbusters to end the Oregon game, except for just an outstanding play by now current Chicago Bear, America's mightiest team, Thieneman. He looked really good. But again, how bad he looked in the non-con and how much of that was receivers, we'll never really know. I think that we got to bury last season as quickly as possibly, man. We need kickoff so bad. But I say all this to say, Bill, I think Rocco Becht and Alex Mansky as a top two are an upgrade over Aller and Grunkmeyer. And I know Mansky hasn't really seen the field very much at all. Grunkmeyer, I know, didn't really see the field much at all leading into last season. I think his first career and only pass leading up to the last season was an interception against SMU in the playoff. But I do feel better about where this room is, simply because I feel like it's got a much higher floor. And considering the fact that the ceiling for last year's Penn State quarterbacks never really was hit, I'm going to give the nod to this iteration of that room.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. Daniel, would you like to follow in Matt's footsteps, or do you want to keep pushing this one off?
No, yeah, I think that.
Let's go.
I'll start from the bottom and work the way up to the top. I mean, I think when you talk the room top to bottom, I think that the rooms are pretty similar when you look at the archetype of player, where your QB2 is a redshirt freshman who is well regarded, within the program, and then also had some recruiting buzz. I mean, Grunkmeyer was a fringe top 100 prospect for us. Mansky was a 4-star in the composite. And so I think that is a pretty similar baseline. As with most college football teams, if you have to go to QB3 or below, it's going to get dicey. And so I think when you look at the top with Becht and Aller, I think Matt did a really good job of, looking at through the college only lens. Where you think about, Aller really does have that high potential, and it seems like he could be in a situation where he could reach it right now, in Pittsburgh. But when you look at, where things were last year, you had him in year 2 under Andy Kotelnicki, where it was still a bit of a square peg round hole situation. And so you weren't completely, like, you were confident, because I think we all thought, and I still do think Andy Kotelnicki is a good offensive mind, but there was still a little bit of awkwardness there. And whereas with Becht, he's coming with Taylor Mauser, who was at Iowa State for all 4 years. Becht was there, OC the last couple. So I think that when you do that, and then like the body of work, I know that Becht was hurt last year, but 2024 really good. Had this team one win away from the college football playoff. And so, yeah, I think when you're talking about like college lens, like let's go right now. Obviously we're colored by how last year ended, and how Drew Aller performed. But I do think that for a college football team to go out and try to reach its ceiling, and not necessarily individual players reach their ceiling, I think you go 2026, but it's really, really close, because like I'm still a huge Aller guy, and I'm still a believer in those tools.
Yeah, same here. And I'm also going to go with 2026. Y'all touched on the main reasons why. For me, the single biggest thing is that from basically day one with Andy Kotelnicki, it was Drew Aller is a weird fit in the offense that Andy Kotelnicki wants to run. And it had highs, it had lows, it had some really good moments. It had some moments you're going to want to take back. It never felt like in Andy Kotelnicki's offense, whether it's because of Andy, whether it's because of James, whether it's whatever, that Drew Aller was the guy. In Taylor Mauser's offense, it is built around having Rocco Becht at quarterback and having Rocco Becht be his guy. And like just on that one singular thing, I'm giving the nudge to 2026. If you want to look at it more holistically, like hindsight being 2020 and saying, well, we saw what Grunt could do, we don't know what Mansky could do, and you want to give us 25 of that, fine. I'm still going to say 2026. Now I think it's time to move on to a pair that are going to be very, very easy. Daniel, I'll let you start. Running back. Would you take the room with the two guys who are like the two most productive running backs in Penn State history, or would you take this one?
Yeah, I am going to go with 2025. Don't really know what else I need to say about Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. That's like just watch the tape. And you would take those two guys, I think, any year on your team. It's going to be interesting this year, but you're not going to really, even if you do like by committee and stuff, it's tough to reach the highs that you had last year from those two guys.
Yeah, I think if you want to get really contrarian and say at the end of 2025 with how Singleton struggled just kind of holistically, and you don't think any of the three are going to have that kind of a low, like it balances itself out. Plus last year's running back room was two guys. This one is three guys, and then who knows after that. But just kind of fundamentally, last year's team was built around two guys. Offense was built around two guys in particular, Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. And I think you kind of have to give it to them off of that. Matt, I'm going to guess you're going to make this a clean sweep.
Yeah, this is a quick clean sweep here, Bill. I don't think, the more I think about it, we really didn't appreciate Kaytron Allen enough. And I think by nature of that is probably Singleton was the flashy guy, the Pennsylvania native, the, highly touted kid. Kaytron Allen was unreal. Like he was so freaking good. Like the fact that he's a Penn State's all-time leading rusher, and I know he played longer than the other two guys, fairly high on that. Oh, I guess Royster was here for 4 years, so maybe not so much. That room was just unreal. Like even if Penn State could go 4 solid guys deep, if you want to throw Cam Wallace in there this year, I still don't think they hold a candle to the program's all-time leader in touchdowns and an all-time leader in rushing yards. And those are two different guys. Like that is fairly absurd to think about. So it's running backs by a mile here for 2025, running backs by a mile here for me.
Yeah, I'm just now realizing how it's kind of weird that like one of the big reasons why I think it went off the rails for James was because they were so hell-bent on getting Singleton like the reps and the confidence and everything. It's very wild that happened when his entire thing has always been like consistency and reliability. And Katron was just like, you set your watch to him being 6.5 yards a kick. Like I'm just now realizing this on August 17th of 2026. So really good podcasting. Do we even want to talk about wide receivers, or do we want to just all say 2026 and move on?
I'm fine with saying 2026 and moving on. Kyron Hudson was cut by the Chicago Bears.
You're
so
kidding.
they lose some points for me as America's most morally good organization.
Liam Clifford lasted a week with the Colts.
You know what's funny, Daniel? I was looking at the box score the following day. I'm like, damn, Liam didn't have a catch, and then I realized he got cut before that game even kicked off.
Yeah. I mean, also, if he didn't get cut, I think it's pretty safe to, with all due respect to Liam. Daniel, is there anything you would like to add to this one before we get to one that might actually be very interesting?
Yeah, I think just to go over like this group of wide receivers, the one thing that just really stands out to me is just the diversity of body types that you have. And I think it feels like it opens up more things for the offense. I think even like Terry Smith has talked about it, where he was just like, yeah, I don't want to misattribute the quote. I forget if it was Terry. I forget if it was someone else, but like it was said by someone where it was like, yeah, last year was just, in the past, it's just been all slot receivers. It's all these guys who are like 6'1" and shorter, who can individually do certain things, but when you put it all together, you have some redundancies to work through. And I think with this group, like, Karan Brookins was back at practice today and like 6'5", 205. I was talking to, I've said it a couple times on our podcast, but I'm like, I don't think Penn State had anyone like that in the past 5 years. I know like Lyric Samuel redshirted last year, but he's skinny. And then I know that Malik Mega was bigger and kind of a physical specimen, but he wasn't like a basketball player out there. He was still like a track player. So I think that with Sowell's a big dude and moves well. I just think with all these different body types, it really diversifies the skill sets. And I think that, beyond like the quality of the player and whatnot, I just think having that and in the system is going to help this offense, this passing game a lot.
Daniel, can I ask a quick question? If I were to say I'm the conductor of the Keith Jones hype train, do you think I'd sell a lot of tickets on that train down the line? Or do you think it's going to be, do you think that's going to be not a seat very many people want to jump on? Because I talked about it in our receivers podcast preview. I am so fascinated by Matt Campbell and this staff's ability to find talented receivers in really weird places. Like Hakeem Butler was a 2-star recruit, either Higgins or Noel, whereas at like Eastern Kentucky, like this, I know it's throwing a dart at the wall, especially because it's a Penn State receiver, but I'm so fascinated by this guy simply because of this staff's track record.
I think when you talk about the absences that they've had, and I know that that is a reason that some people have consternation. Brookins it was personal matter. Eskelson was watching from the side today, but the main beneficiary of all that has been Keith Jones. So he was banged up in the spring and is getting time on the field now. And so we'll see. I mean, I think that he is one of the guys where when you're talking about non-con and you're like trying to figure out like, all right, like who's a guy that could flash, maybe in the second half in one of those games. I think that he is someone that, might be able to make a couple wow plays and really catch some people's attention. So I think you might have, it might be like a model train at this point.
Okay.
Like
okay,
maybe
I'm cool with that.
It can like after non-con, it'll be like a train that like at a Christmas village that you can ride around in.
I'm very glad, Daniel, you mentioned the kind of diversity in body types and how there's like flexibility to do stuff with this wide receiver room that they just didn't really have last year. Like last year was very obvious. We're trusting Kyron Hudson to win one-on-ones on the outside. We are trying to find ways to get the ball into Trevor Pena's hands so he can do stuff after the catch. And Devontae Ross, we're going to scheme up shot plays to him. And it just kind of didn't work because Kyron Hudson's not quite able to do that. That's not quite Trevor Pena's game. And that's also like not the best way to use Devontae Ross. So like, I just generally think kind of like the quarterback thing, there is an understanding of how to use these guys that I don't know if last year's staff I don't want to say didn't have. It's just there was a lot more putting a square peg into a round hole last year than I think there's going to be this year. Where I think that might not be the case is along the offensive line, which we are 9 for 9 on agreeing so far. I think there might be a little bit of dissent in this one. Daniel, if you would like to kick us off on the offensive line, because I think this one's tough.
Yeah, I was actually talking about, we got this question on our podcast last week, and I did talk around it. So I'm going to talk around it and I'll see if that puts me on one side or the other. I do think that last year's offensive line, like where we are right now, when you combine experience and pedigree, and I will take, and this is the thing where I was like, talking about like with Aller, where it's like, oh, like what, like factoring in what happened versus, where you were at the beginning. Like you did have 2 guys off that offensive line get drafted, including a first rounder. You had 2 others signed as UDFAs. So there is like that, there is there's talent there was experience. It's hard to divorce how it went, like what it looked like from that. I think with the 2026 offensive line, like I think I'm confident that Trevor Bohr can make the jump from Big 12, Big 10. Like you look at him, I think that that's good. Brock Riker, I'm a little bit like, all right, like I think I believe the staff, like it passes the eye test, but that is a leap for him. Donka, right tackle, I'm good with that. I think that'll be better for him than being a guard. But then like Malachi Goodman never played a college snap. And then Cooper Cousins has played in a lot of games, but hasn't necessarily played a lot of football. I think he's still under 300 career snaps. A lot of rotation, like not even rotation stuff, just a lot of like 6th offensive linemen playing in garbage time, that sort of thing. So like he's still a wait and see for me. I think that like if you talk about where we were August 2025 and August 2026, looking ahead at the teams, I still think you take the 2025 group just because of like what you had talent level. Like we'll see with Malachi Goodman, but I don't think this group has a first round pick on it. Like we'll see. But like last year going in, like you kind of knew that that's where Vanga was headed. So it's really close, but I do think that you take last year's group just because of what you had seen from them.
I think that is completely fair. I think it's 2025, and you did mention the big reasons why. I will say not quite having. I even last year's offensive line, it's not like if Vega got hurt, you were like, all right, cool, TJ Shanahan's going to get in, he's just going to do the job. Or if Drew Shelton gets hurt, it's going to be like, okay, we're going to kick Donko over there, and then all of a sudden there's no depth. Like depth is a bit of an issue on this offensive line, and it was kind of an issue last year. I would say last year's line as well. I do think it's very close. And I also would say I think it's possible by the time we get to October for basically what you mentioned, Daniel, with Malachi Goodman and with Cooper Cousins. I think, and Brock Riker as well, I think it's very possible by the time we get to that point in the calendar, we're saying it's 2026. Like they are just clearly better. Last year's offensive line didn't quite gel the way it was supposed to. Maybe it's because Donka's playing out of position, whatever. And 2026 is better. But I think going into the year, I would take last year's unit. I would also probably say more than any other unit, if I have to like ID the one that I think I'm going to have a different answer on by the end of the year, it might be this one. Matt, what do you say?
I have no lean here as I begin this sentence, Bill. So I'm just going to talk it through in real time and kind of see where I want to go. Venga was unreal. Like, and if you think back, if we were to rattle off the reasons Penn State was bad last year or their offense didn't hit the heights they were supposed to, the offensive line is probably coming up, what, the 4th answer we have, the 5th answer we have? that's fairly low in the grand scheme of things for reasons a team can have a bad offense. If you're going to reason number 4, it was bad. It wasn't like, obviously it wasn't like a mid 2010s Penn State offensive line. With all that being said, though, Daniel made a really good point. It's a ton of projection. Like, Malachi Goodman has not played a single college snap. One thing I do like about the Malachi Goodman situation is he was a highly touted recruit who was still getting on the field fairly early. Like, I think the only other 5-star offensive line recruit Franklin landed was Javen Williams, who now plays at Charlotte. So, like, it never really clicked for him, even later in his career. So I feel like that bodes well. I talked about it a couple of times. The way Matt Campbell talks about Brock Reicher, like going back to the Phil Steele magazine days of like Midsummer, has been like, this kid is the greatest center we've ever seen. But again, that jump up from, oh my God, Texas State's in the Pac-12 now. Who knows where they were last year? They might have been Sun Belt. I don't even know.
Belt.
Was it Sun Belt? Thank you, Daniel. I know that drives me nuts up a wall. I say all this to say, I think I have to be with you guys, and that's not good podcasting, but with how much we don't know. Like, Cooper Cousins, I feel like, has been a very visible part of the Penn State football program for a long time. We haven't really seen him be tested throughout the course of a very long, sample size at all. Donko, I think, is set and forget, but again, coming off an injury, he's a guy who's been hurt before. You never really know with that. I'm going to have to give the nod to the 2025 Penn State offensive line. But like you, Bill, I would be shocked if I didn't have my opinion of this switched fairly quickly. Maybe as early as like Penn State's trip out here to Illinois when they play Northwestern in a couple months.
Another interesting one on the other side of the football is the defensive line. And for me, this one is...
Oh, do we do tight end, Bill?
Oh, we didn't do tight end.
Tight
my
end
goodness.
you.
We skipped right over tight end. Disrespect for me. I do apologize.
This is Joey Schlaffer erasure, Bill.
This is Joey Schlaffer erasure, in part because I am taking 2026, because it is 3 guys who I think have done it in college football versus like a lot of projecting last year. A very quick stat. Khalil Dinkins in his first 3 years at Penn State, 23 receptions, 232 yards, 5 touchdowns. Going into last season, everyone was like, he's going to be the guy. Andrew Rappelier just last year, 20 receptions, 180 yards, 3 touchdowns. There's a chance he's like their 3rd tight end. It's going to be a little bit funky in the tight end room because it's more 1A, 1B, 1C than anything. But I think tight end, I think you have to go with this year's room. Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you have to take this year's room. I think like Ben Bramer, I think is going to be a beast. Like, I'm really, really excited to see him. And I think he'll fit in really well to the lineage when you think about like Fryer moved to Strange, to Johnson, to Warren, to skipping over last year to now, I think it'll be Bramer. And then, Burkle has gotten really good feedback as a run blocker. I mean, Matt Campbell called him best run blocking tight end in the country. And then Rappelier, I think, is a really interesting player. And there's been a lot of really good things said about him. He looks really good out there. I'm excited to see what that looks like. Brings a little bit of an edge to the team. I will think this is like a little bit of a tangent, but involves Rappelier, and it kind of fits into that. Like, I have him in the same category as Cooper Cousins and Kobe Howard, where it is like we talk about them a lot. I think everyone who has watched the team, and especially us, like, we watch these guys camp, we've covered these recruitments, like I've been watching Cooper Cousins since 2022, and like I'm in on all of these guys as prospects. But when you talk about, all right, like, what can they do this fall? Like we said, Cooper Cousins played in a lot of games, practiced a lot, hasn't played a lot of football. Kobe Howard, he's got like 6 catches, and he's gonna have to fight for catches this year. Even last year when there was the talk that like, hey, we need to get him involved more, we need to get him in more, it was like 1 or 2 catches a game under Terry. And so it's still like the way that we talk about him like doesn't necessarily match the production. It's still a lot of potential. And then Rappelier, like 20 catches, 180 yards, 3 touchdowns, like all that is in like 2 games, 3 games. The touchdowns are in 3 games, and most of I think half of the catches and yards are in the final 2 games of the year. I think that showed what a ceiling is, but it's still a little bit like, he redshirted, injury year, half a year knocking off the rust, then we saw him. I think all three of these guys, I'm really curious what they look like now that, they're healthy, they're in line to have big roles or compete for big roles. And what does it look like? It's one of those things where I'm waiting for it to level out in terms of like how we think about them, how we talk about them with what it looks like on the field.
Matthew?
The way, and again, Daniel, you've spoken to Taylor Mauser, like when we straight up just haven't. He seems like the kind of guy who is not going to try to galaxy brain his way through a lot of things. Like I feel like the staff kind of did last year. Bill, you called out this insane desire to like try to get Nick Singleton going. And I understand that in practice, but at some point you have to say, hey man, it's the biggest game against Oregon and we've put up like 60 yards in 3 quarters. We got to stop this. Like, and to their credit, they did do that. But Mauser feels like the kind of guy who's going to say, yeah, that guy's 6'7". Why wouldn't I throw it to him 40 times a game? Like, yeah, Gabe Burkle can catch 25 balls in a season and be great for us. Yeah, Rappelier can do X, Y, Z. Like, it feels like there's a play caller in the Penn State booth now who is very much in the mold of, why would I not do the best thing possible and the coolest thing imaginable? And I feel like that's going to lead to a much more productive year for Penn State tight ends than what we saw last year, simply by nature of just the vibe I get from Taylor Mauser.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. So what I wanted to talk about before my dumb ass forgot about tight ends, the defensive line. I think this is a weird one because I would argue I feel better about the depth on last year's defensive line, on this year's defensive line. I don't know if this defensive line has guys the caliber of Daniel Sutton and Zane Durant. And also Zane Durant was like horribly miscast in last year's defense. So like, I think I'm willing to go with 2025. Again, it's really close. I do think the thing I mentioned, Daniel also mentioned in the quarterback section about how like last year's, like this year's defense is going to be more suited to the personnel than I think last year's was. It really factors in, but ultimately, like, I just don't know, Matt, if they have a game changer like Daniel Sutton or Zane Durant was capable of being. So I'll go with 2025, and I'm very potentially wrong about that.
Yeah, I'm going to go with 2025 too, with the good caveat call out there, Bill, that I think it was mainly a scheme issue surrounding how they used Zane Durant. Like the Ohio State defensive lines that were good under Jim Knowles did not feature like a maybe generous 6'6'1", 298-pound defensive tackle as a guy you need to have a lot of production for you. And one thing I think is overlooked, Bill, you rattle off, Daniel Sutton and Zariah Fisher was there, Alonzo Ford was there. There was a lot of like young talent that was starting to blossom for Penn State last year along the defensive front. I mean, Bill, you know better than anybody how highly I thought of Xavier Gilliam. Like I thought he played really, really well considering what he was asked to do as a redshirt freshman. Chaz Coleman was really good. We can acknowledge that. Yvonne Kembaju was playing very well for a true freshman who was overlooked because what he did wasn't nearly as impressive athletically as what Coleman did, but I think was way more impressive technically. So I'm going to give the nod, Bill, to 2025 just because I do think the overall talent was a little bit better. And I think the depth, I think, was just a little bit better given how young those guys were too. Like they got so much young production. It was really impressive what they had in that room when you think about it.
Yeah. Daniel, thoughts?
I'm taking 2026.
Totally. I totally get it.
Finally, some disagreement. We got it.
I mean,
you asshole! How dare you?
I'm sowing discord in the chat. I think that, like, I don't want to, when talking about like all these defensive spots, like I think this is going to come up at the next one we talk about. Like, I don't want to like just blame like a lack of fit in the system last year for everything. But I do think that it's a little bit impossible to ignore when you think about how these defensive lines are constructed. When you talk about Zane Durant being miscast and what Jim Knowles might have wanted him to do, I think that when you look at the interior of this Penn State defensive line this year, like I think right now, I think if they rolled out tomorrow, I think the top two DTs would be Keanu Williams and Siale Tapaki, and like Williams 6'5", 317, Tapaki 6'4", 326, like. Penn State hasn't had that since PJ Mustipher. Even though James Franklin did say after Michigan in 2022 that they needed to get bigger at defensive tackle. Never happened. But I think when you start there, that's a really good building block. And then you talk about like Vakalahi, Nadum, Carnell, like those are all like massive guys to have in the middle. And I think that while the talent on the edge might not necessarily have the same ceiling as a denied Ennis Sutton or non-conference Chaz Coleman, I do think that you have like some, good depth there that could potentially grow into things a little bit. I mean, I think Ivan Kamaju, like I think that he's poised for a really good year. Watching Ike Eziagu in person, like he is like your quintessential first guy off the bus. And I think that he's got some versatility there. And then behind them, like I'm excited to see Max Granville back. And then you've got some young guys like Alex McPherson from Colorado. Like he looks like he's ready to play in the Big Ten now. And then, like what do you get out of LeVar Arrington II? I think that's like a bit of a wild card. So I think I'll go with 2026 just because I think that, I think honestly, even if you go scheme independent, just the construction that you have of, the bulk in the center, couple different body types on the edge gives you some flexibility to do some different things.
I wish the NCAA, and I don't know how you would track it, would keep track of like batted passes as a stat because you rattled off like how big these guys are. And, PJ Mustipher really was probably the last guy of that size. I would be fascinated to know how many passes this defensive front's able to get their hands on. Penn State defensive lines haven't really done that noticeably like at scale and maybe in the entire time I've been a fan. So I'm very curious. That's like the big thing I've been thinking about, like talking about this big defensive front, because the pass rush might hurt a little bit, but I would be curious if that's where they're able to make a fairly large impact week to week.
The best way to track batted passes is to I'm trying to figure out a way to make a half-ass joke about the 2017 Iowa Penn State game here. I can't do it. We're going to move on to linebackers. Nice. Yes, they little Trace McSorley against a bunch of 6'8" Iowa dudes, just like ugh.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
I had a hunch. Linebacker, interesting one. So much of this to me comes down to whether or not one particular guy ends up playing linebacker or if he's going to be off the edge. Daniel, you go first. What do you think 2025 versus 2026 in the linebacker?
Yeah, so this is one of those positions where it's like you ported over the Iowa State group, but the big difference is that like they're stepping into a totally different scheme than what they did at Iowa State, which makes the with like Soel and Eskelson, and the wide receivers and tight ends on offense, you can kind of be like, we know what it'll look like for them. For these linebackers, it's going to be pretty different. But I think I give the edge to 2026 just because of the depth. Like, I think that if everybody is healthy, and even if Caleb Bacon plays defensive end, I do think that you have the depth to get through things a little bit. Like Cooper Ebel, Tony Rojas, I think that's a good place to start. Cale Brazina. We're not sure with Alex Tash yet. When that you want to talk about a Matt Campbell favorite, and we're not exactly sure like what his timeline is. And then there's been some good things from Cam Smith. So I think they're in a nice spot. And I, don't want to bring up the scheme again, but I do think that there should be a little bit more trust and a willingness to play other guys. And the joke that we made last year was it seemed like Amari Campbell was the only guy on the defense who knew the scheme and knew what was going on, because every time you talk to these guys, it was like late October, early November, and be like, yeah, we're getting in these extra meetings with our position coaches. We're doing this. And you talk to Amari and he'd be like, oh, yeah, I know what's going on. Like, yeah, there's no issue with the scheme. I know what I'm doing. And then, just the willingness after Rojas got hurt is they never played a third linebacker, which was led to some tough situations for Dom DeLuca. I just think that this year the depth is a little bit more advanced in age, advanced in athleticism. And I think, obviously, can't know until we see it. I do think there will be a little bit more trust and a willingness to play different guys if you need to.
Yeah, God, hiring Jim Knowles was, in retrospect, Jesus Christ. Matt, if you would like to chime in here.
I think this is the maybe the room where the schedule maybe sways the way I go, because I think if you were to look down the barrel and you were to see, hey, Penn State schedule, the biggest opponents are going to be Washington under Jed Fish, who has liked to run the football, Michigan with a quarterback in Bryce Underwood, who might require them to primarily run the football, and Minnesota with PJ Fleck, who again with Darius Taylor is gonna run the football. Daniel, you called out when we talked about defensive lines, the thing James Franklin said back in 2022 about getting bigger. I would have, I think, serious concerns about Penn State's 2025 linebacking core holding up against this kind of schedule, because Tony Rojas, yes, while he can play, he's still a former high school linebacker who's not 6'3" like these other guys are. Amari Campbell was maybe generously 5'11", and Dom DeLuca was an awesome story. But we can be honest, that's really the extent of what he was able to give them consistently. Like, he would not have been able to hold up against Michigan in the Big House, as opposed to this group, which features Tony Rojas as a big part of it. But I view him as more of a luxury in the linebacker room by nature of how they'll use him, I think, more so than like, hey, dude, you got to play Mike. You're going to have to just be in the A gap all game long. Like, I think that's where Cooper Ebo and Cale Brzezina are massive assets. So just by nature of the schedule on this front and what I think they're going to be asked to do, I'm going to give it to 2026.
I'm inclined to agree with 2026. And a big reason why is we just saw so little of the top linebacker group last year with Tony getting hurt. And then, he was kind of the guy who when you looked at how the linebacker room was built, he was the one who kind of brought it all together. He was the one that was able to compensate for the fact that neither Amari nor Dom were like, crazy dynamic athletes or anything like that. But if you're looking at top three versus top three of Amari Campbell, Dom DeLuca, Tony Rojas versus Cooper Ebel, Caleb Bacon, Tony Rojas, I think this year's group is better. You look at the depth guys they had at linebacker last year, was like Dakari Nelson didn't really play. Keon Wiley, still waiting on that. Anthony Speck, LeVar Arrington II, more of an edge rusher. Alex Tash, they didn't really trust him. Cam Smith didn't really trust him. Versus Cam Smith. Cam Smith is here, but Alex Tash, like Daniel mentioned, is a guy that Matt Campbell seems to adore. Cale Brzezina is a guy who Matt Campbell clearly knows and trusts. John Klosterman, a guy who can maybe be an innings eater if they need him. Like, I just think this year's group mixes top level talent and depth so much better. So I think we have to take them. One that I think could be interesting is cornerback, because I don't really have a read in either direction on this one. Matt, what say you?
On this front, I mean, it's so tough because locked in AJ Harris, I think, is a really good football player. The problem is how often you get locked in AJ Harris versus gets yanked from the Northwestern game AJ Harris. There isn't enough of a gully between how often we've seen those two versions of AJ Harris. I really think Aldavian Collins, and to the old staff's credit, to find a guy like AC out of the portal from Mississippi State, lowly recruited kid, I always thought that was a depth piece, and now he's being talked about by you guys, Daniel, as like, hey, this guy could actually be like all Big Ten caliber, which I think is a testament to them. Elliott Washington, similar to Cooper Cousins, got on the field as a true freshman, maybe in the same vein. It's always kind of been projection. As opposed to now we have another year of Aldavian Collins. Zion Tracy is talked about really highly. Darius Dixon, I think, can develop into a really solid player given his pedigree. Josh Johnson is fairly decent. Jameer Joseph, I think, has a chance to play. I think I'm going to have to give it to 2026 as I talk myself into this in real time. I think there's more proven commodities, and I think a much higher ceiling. And I think after losing Terry as their position coach last year, I'm excited to see what this cornerback room appreciates more about playing for Terry specifically on a week-to-week basis now that he's back in that room. So I'm going to give it to 2026.
Daniel, what about you?
I think if you could get like 2024 AJ Harris in the 2025 room, I think that that would probably tip the scales in that direction. Yeah, I mean, this one is really tough because like a lot of the guys are the same. When you talk about Dixon, Tracy, and Collins all being back. Collins is an interesting one because like he's done everything in his career really quietly, where we were still talking like in that opener last year, we were like, all right, when's Elliot Washington going to come in? Because Elliot Washington was the one that had the loud offseason. So I was like, all right, like when's Washington going to come in? When are they going to start rotating? Oh, they haven't rotated yet. Like what's going on? And it probably took until like Big Ten play for us to be like, oh wait, like Davian Collins like actually did win this job. Like
did he sweep the winter workout warrior? Like that whole
Yes.
thing? Yeah, that's
Yes,
what
he
it was. That's a good pull.
But yeah, I mean, I think that like I think I'll go this year just because Darius Dixon is a year older. Zion Tracy, it seems like they're really willing to trust him, put a lot on his plate. And then Davian Collins is just also another year older. I think this is one of those rooms where we can kind of use that as like a cop out. Like I think Jameer Joseph is the third guy up on the outside. I wrote about this a little bit and talked about this on the podcast today, where it's like, if you want like a really fun air quotes position battle to track, number 4 outside corner, Evan McDaniels and Christian Askew, like that's really fun because they're two guys that like we haven't really seen anyone that looks like them play corner since like maybe Joey Porter Jr. But I think McDaniels is bigger than Porter, and then Askew is like 6'4". So they'll be like the fourth guy up on the outside. So I think that this one you just lean on Tracy, Collins, Dixon, all getting older, and then like Joseph being someone that is that guy that can rotate in, because Terry Smith is willing to do that when someone has proven themselves.
It's a weird one for me because this isn't a room where they just like ported in a bunch of Iowa State guys. Like the only Iowa State guy they brought over was Hunter Soule. And, they, as Daniel mentioned, Evan McDaniels from Syracuse. The tricky thing for me is there's so much I just need to see it with this room, with what happens with Darius Dixon as he's suddenly going to be the guy going up against the other team's best cornerback. What are you going to get out of Jameer Joseph? All the guys that Daniel mentioned is like another year older and another year of more experience. It's needing to see that with them versus last year's cornerback room, even after AJ Harris got a bad case of quidiosis, like was pretty good with Davian Collins, Elliot Washington, Zion Tracy, and Harris, when he was locked in, was the best guy in both of these rooms, I would say. For now, I wouldn't be stunned if Dixon ends up eclipsing him. So, like,
Dixon closed the year really well, too, last year.
He did. Yeah. He did. So I view this kind of like I do the offensive line, where, like, going into the season, I'm going to say 2025. Also, when that first pass against Marshall gets picked off, like, I will immediately change my mind on this. It's a close one and it's a difficult one. And I'd say the exact same thing about safety, where I think so much of safety for me is I just need to see how quickly Jeremiah Cooper can get up to speed. That is the entire thing for the safety room with me, because Marcus Neal is awesome. Jeremiah Cooper is awesome. Just those two at the very top, I think they're like, that's all they need for the safety room to be better. It's just needing to see with Patton or seeing with Cooper. Jameson Patton, a guy that they trust, who they've been able to fold in a little bit. Vabu Torre, a guy who's a holdover. He got mentioned a second ago, but Josiah Zayas, if he's playing safety, he might just be a dog. There's a lot to like about this year's safety room. I'm going to very narrowly give it to last year because of Zaki Wheatley, because they had a couple of King Mac, Antoine Belgrave Shorter that they could fold in. And I just like trust that going into the season more than I trust this safety room, because I need to see it with Cooper. But again, if he's fine by the time they get to the conference slate, I think it's going to flip on itself. I will narrowly give it to 2025. What about yourself, Daniel?
I think I'm giving it to 26. I agree. I agree with you on Cooper. Like that's the like caveat, the asterisk that we kind of put in every single time we talk about the secondary, where it's like, okay, it looks like this today. This is what we think the structure is. Little plug, read lions247.com to see if there are some absences, what they might do, in the secondary to shuffle things around. We got a little look at that today. But then you just go back to, but once Jeremiah Cooper is in the mix, we don't really know what that means for Zion Tracy, what that means for Marcus Neal, what that means for Jamison Patton. Like, is Patton the one that goes to the bench? Do they, roll dime like a little bit more, like 6 DBs out there? I think that's like a wait and see, because Neal does have that like hybrid linebacker, nickel safety skill set. I do think that like Zachy Wheatley was really good last year. I was actually talking to someone who is close to the Panthers like last night about him, and I was just like, yeah, like he was a really cool story because he that he got benched in that Indiana game where the Penn State defense got pantsed twice, and it kind of looked dire, but he came back, was really overshadowed by KJ Winston going into 2024, and then really emerged as a very solid Big Ten safety and parlayed it into being a draft pick. I think there's something to be said for that, but I just think like the talent ceiling, like Cooper should be in the NFL right now. If he didn't get hurt, like he probably gets drafted. There's a good chance Neal is like, could be the first Penn State player drafted next year. We'll see. Penn State DB never gone in the first round. And so I just think that like, and you just have like a higher ceiling and more talent right now, I think, because like King Mac was, I think, solid. Like Dejon Lane kind of never super came together for. He did some nice things, but didn't quite feel consistent. Antoine Belgrave Shorter, like he won that starting job, but then like lost it pretty quickly. So who knows if that's a Knowles thing. But I just think that with what you have right now, I think the ceiling is there. And also like it helps that these guys are all vets.
Yeah, I messed up. I'm still going to ride with Zachy Wheatley though, but I messed up. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, Bill, I'm shocked. This was like open and shut for me. I think this safety room is so much better this year, and I'm glad you call out the Antoine Belgrave Shorter winning that starting gig last year, because it's not like he won the starting gig and then he got replaced by someone who was like a world beater. He got replaced with King Mac, who's a fine ball player, but it's not even like, Bill, let's go into our bag here. Let's go back to the Penn State 2018 tight end race where John Holland won the job out of camp, and then it quickly became, oh, Pat Freiermuth's way better. Like, this wasn't one of those situations where, hey, a future second round pick came in. Like, this just wasn't that last year, as opposed to this year where there's 3 guys who have played all kinds of reps, who have proven that they can be high level, high impact players. And a guy in Jeremiah Cooper and Daniel, I feel like that's been something I've heard all offseason, is that, hey, man, this guy should be in the NFL. Like, this guy, if he stays healthy, he goes fairly high. And Wheatley, I think, as a 5th round pick was kind of a travesty considering how productive he really was. But I still think Jeremiah Cooper is a better prospect. I think his ball skills are great. And you pair that with a guy like Marcus Neal, who I think is going to really thrive, not having to be as much of a box safety by necessity, but being more so as a luxury when you pair it with all of this beef in front of him. So I think this safety room is, I had it as my top unit in our rankings, Bill. I think this unit is way better than it was last year, because I think the high end is better. I think it's deeper.
Yeah, I very much respect that. And again, at some point during the Marshall game, I will say, yeah, I messed up. Fun game, fun exercise. Daniel, please let the people know where they could find you. And then on your way out, if you could, give us one scalding hot take about this Penn State season, which I'm very excited to get you to do, because you're a very measured and reasonable person. So I want to see where you're taking this one.
I know I've really been trying to think about it and to give something really, really good. But I'm still work. I'll try to work through it while I'm doing this.
Okay.
Yeah, you can follow me. I am on Twitter, X, Daniel JT Gallen. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Daniel JT Gallen, plus the rest of the links. I post about stuff other than Penn State, more on Blue Sky than whatever. So if you've liked this personality that you've seen, that comes out a little bit more over there. Instagram by Daniel JT Gallen. Follow Lions247. We're upping our YouTube game right now, doing some live podcasts. So if you like our podcast, try to tune in live. That's on YouTube. Just search Lions247 and subscribe to the site. 60% off right now, or $1 for 1 month. That'll obviously at this point, this will take you to almost week 3 against Buffalo. Tyler Donahue, Mark Brennan, Grace Brennan, Tyler Calvaruso, myself. I think we've got some fun things planned, and I think we do a good job covering the team holistically. So I think that's enough vamping for my hot take. I thought of a really funny one.
Ooh, let's love it.
It'll be my second one because it's not real, but it would be a funny one if I made it my identity. But first one, like I've talked to Mark Brennan about this, and I don't want to steal his thunder completely, but I think we're gonna get a first round Penn State defensive back finally. Okay. I know people love to be like, oh well, Joey Porter Jr. was number 32. That should count. He was a second round pick. He was not called on Thursday night. That was Friday night. Like, is different. I don't know who. I know that like Davian Collins could be sneaky. Marcus Neal could be there. I don't know if one of the other guys makes a jump, but I think that there's enough like intrigue there on the back end that I think that. So yeah, I mean that might just be hot. I don't know if that's scalding. If I really wanted to be, I think the funniest take. I'm offering this to someone. Someone can pick this one up. I think a funny one would be Penn State football wins more games than Penn State basketball. I think that would be like I don't think that'll happen. But it's the thing where you look at the Penn State football schedule, you get to 10 wins a lot quicker, than you thought you would. Last year, basketball won 12 games. So, you can do the math there if you want, even though the non-con schedule that came out, I think makes it a little dicey. But yeah, I'm offering that up to someone else to take.
That would almost certainly guarantee that the football team's a playoff team. So I would be extremely into that. Matt, any final things to say before I send the people off to their week?
No, an update, Bill, to who he play for, because I want to make sure everybody knows where they can watch Penn State football players this fall who have transferred. Tyke Hayes is no longer at the University of Nebraska. So if you're looking for a former Penn State running back to watch, you can watch London Montgomery at Florida, Corey Smith at Toledo, or Jabri Coleman at South Carolina. Best of luck to Tyke Hayes in whatever comes next, but a quick little update to who he play for as rosters finalize.
I will say London Montgomery posted a nice little highlight of him hurdling a guy in practice on his Instagram account. He's looking spry, someone that we never saw take a snap here. And I had one other thing that came up when we were talking about the linebackers that for Penn State fans that are a fan of this guy, that is I think could be a fun storyline to follow. Dom DeLuca started for the Ravens in the preseason opener linebacker.
Oh God.
They didn't start the top 2 guys, and then there's some injury stuff in front of him. And I think he projects as like LB5, LB6, but he did play the most special team snaps of anyone in that game. So talked about a really good story at Penn State. And yeah, I think something to monitor for that story in the NFL this month.
Dom DeLuca being the next Matthew Slater, special teams ace, who, if he ever plays his real position, it means something catastrophic happened, would be quite fun.
Also, what a bummer that number 0 special teamer tradition.
I had such a good transition to get us out of here.
Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
It's okay, Matt.
The number 0 tradition came and gone with 2 guys, and Dom DeLuca is still making special teams plays happen.
Dom DeLuca will make special teams plays happen forever. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar, and thank you very much to our buddy Daniel Gallen for appearing on this edition of the podcast. Make sure you go and subscribe wherever you go and get your podcast. If it's a platform that lets you leave a 5-star review, we would love it if you could leave us a 5-star review. Head on over to YouTube as well to see Daniel and I both wearing Portland Trail Blazers gear during this edition of the podcast. And make sure you like, subscribe, follow along, hop into the comments, whatever you do over there. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Blue Sky. And one last time, thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of the podcast. For Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.